Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy, Jack Slack, munching on a solitary Jaffa cake. Taking it easy today, not being full Jaffa Jack. It's not even a McVitie's, it's a store brand Jaffa cake, because you can get McVitie's, which are better, but they come in smaller packs. I think they've reduced it from 12 to 10 now, which is fucking ludicrous. Or you can get the store brand, which is like 24 in a pack for £1. So that's what we got sitting in the cupboard, and I'm having a single one of those. That's the state my life's in. But the more important thing is UFC 228 was actually surprisingly good. I mean, the narrative up to this and the narrative that I was also indulging in was that both the main event fighters have had some real stinkers. There's every possibility it could be a rubbish card, and it turned out really good. So, colour me surprised. We got some news regarding it too, so we'll jump into the news and then we'll recap everything that was good and everything that was bad. First big news story, Michael Chiesa is going to be suing Conor McGregor over the glass in his face, which I feel is fair enough. Obviously, anytime something negative happens to Conor McGregor, a legion of weird fanboys just jump down whoever is the offending fighter's throat online. But you can't look at that anyway and think that Michael Chiesa is not in the right to do it. Obviously, he's suing for damages and loss of a fight and earnings and things like that, but he did then get the same fight shortly down the road. Of course, that if he had bills that needed paying or something like that, doesn't really help his situation much at the time. Plus the fact that, he was assaulted, and his face was pretty cut up to the point that they wouldn't let him fight. The commission stopped him rather than the UFC, which means that it had to be fairly flagrant because they'll fucking sign anything. This was the same commission and the same time that they allowed Max to go through with concussion-like symptoms. It's compounded by the fact that the UFC, having called the dolly throwing incident the most disgusting thing that's happened in the history of the UFC or whatever it is, they are now using it to advertise the fight. And that's partly because apparently Conor McGregor doesn't want to do any press stuff anymore. It is exhausting. But then that's what he's known for. That's his thing. That's the value that he brings to the table in addition to being an exciting fighter. Because the fight lasts, 25 minutes max. The bullshit up to the fight lasts for weeks and weeks and weeks. But they're now using the trolley in the in the promotional footage. It's the lamest thing you've ever seen. So I think Chiesa has a good leg to stand on because the company is even indulging this thuggish behaviour. And of course it's just so Chiesa gets paid. Conor McGregor is rich enough that he would never suffer any real consequences for anything he did, as proven by the actual trial over that stuff, or hearing, or whatever it was. So hopefully Chiesa gets paid. Good on him. Bit of a rumour out of left field. Dominick Cruz's training partners are claiming that the TJ Cruz rematch has been booked for December. That would be a real slap in the face because Dominick Cruz hasn't fought since losing to Cody Garbrandt in December 2016. So 2 years of inactivity. And, it wouldn't, no one here is saying Dominick Cruz doesn't have a great shot at beating TJ Dillashaw because he did it off a layoff already. It's more the fact that you've got there's a division and then there's a separate division of 3 guys who are allowed to fight for the title. You've got guys like Marlon Moraes and Rafael Assunção taking on everyone they possibly can. Those guys take on murderer's row of guys. Jimmie Rivera as well. Facing all the upcoming guys and all the established names in the division and then never getting anywhere near a title shot. It's fucking bizarre. And there's nothing that separates Dominick, without the title, Dominick Cruz shouldn't be separate from the rest of the division. He should have to fight Rafael Assunção or Jimmie Rivera or Marlon Moraes. But he doesn't. I don't know. It's just the weirdest thing because he's not like a huge pay-per-view draw. He's not a huge name. I don't get why they him all these breaks. Paul Felder, and they screw him over at every turn they possibly can because he's a company guy. They're like, yeah, he'll be fine if we just snatch his opponent out from under him. So God, I hope that's not true. I'd like to see TJ versus Dom too as much as anyone, but that's just such a depressing state of affairs where for 3 years almost from January 2016, I believe is when TJ and Dom fought the first time. From January 2016 until after December 2018, only 3 guys will have been allowed in the title picture, and they, barely fought anyone outside of it. TJ has already fought Rafael Assunção, so that's fair enough. TJ actually had to earn his second shot at the title, but that division just baffling. They've got a lot of talent there, and they just refuse to show them because they're Brazilian or they win decisions. But Dom wins decisions, so, how long can you live on Team Alpha Male beef? Other piece of news, Nick Diaz says the UFC needs to stop making bullshit fights regarding Till versus Woodley. Nick Diaz needs money. He has to draw attention to himself so a club will book him or something like that. His life is bizarre now. He goes to clubs, puts in celebrity appearances and gets drunk every night. Very sad state of affairs. Another piece of weirder news, Brennan Ward was forced to pull out of his, I think it's Bellator 206 fight with an injury, and then a day later he retired. He says he's not going to do it anymore, which is really sad because he was sort of an upcoming guy in the welterweight division. He had that really bad loss to Paul Daly, flying knee to the face, completely starched. But other than that, he was a pretty good fighter. And he was only 30 years old, or he is only 30 years old. Talking about him like he's dead now, sorry. He's only 30 years old, so I always assumed plenty of time for him to iron out the wrinkles. But it just sort of reminds you what a hard game this is. He could be in an emotional place right now because he's just had to drop out of another fight. But it tells you how banged up dudes are getting. We forget that because every time someone doesn't pull out of a fight, they are probably still injured. More Bellator news. Eric Silva versus Lawrence Larkin is announced for Bellator 207. That's a fairly decent fight. If that happened in the UFC, you'd be like, that's a fairly decent fight. Or at least until recently. Eric Silva is the poster boy for USADA's effectiveness. He is the most obvious drop-off since the arrival of USADA. Not only physique, but he used to do jumping, spinning back kicks and shit, and swing as hard as he could for 3 rounds solid. Suddenly, he can't do it for even half a round. So, he's a really bad... if he is, or if he was always clean, it's certainly unfortunate that his gas tank just disappeared around the same time. But fair play to Lawrence Larkin, because if there's one place you wouldn't want to fight Eric Silva, it's in Bellator. Drugs are sort of treated in a wink-nudge kind of way. And then final piece of news today, Nico Montano has been stripped of her title. Very sad state of affairs. She wasn't even close to making weight, apparently. Again, we're all going on rumours here, and it's worth remembering that Valentina Shevchenko is not a source for stuff that happened to Nico Montano. People are just like, yeah, well, Valentina said she was 80 pounds over, and you're like, shut the fuck up and stop reading Valentina Shevchenko's Instagram. She said exactly the same stuff about Amanda Nunes when Amanda Nunes dropped out of their fight, and the UFC backed it up because they were mad at Nunes. At any rate, Nico Montano did make the fight. She was hospitalised before the weigh-ins. And she's now been stripped of her title, which means that Valentina Shevchenko is going to get the title without fighting any of the ranked flyweights. Incredible stuff. Anyway, we don't have to talk about Valentina Shevchenko's fight and all the weird fanboys because it didn't happen. Let's go straight into the recaps. So let's have a look at this card, UFC 228. First one that I really enjoyed was Irene Aldana versus Luci, who knows, Pudilova. This was interesting because while I was watching it, people were going like, oh my god, possible fight of the year in the women's division. And I was like, oh, okay, fair enough. But I was watching it and enjoying it. It was a real blood and guts, sloppy sort of brawl. Basically, Pudilova didn't know how to cut the ring or anything, but she just kept moving forward. And Aldana was trying to counter with the right hands, but they weren't doing any damage, and Pudilova would come back with 3 or 4 strikes. And that was the way it went for the entire fight. But it was really good. Blood and guts brawl. Lot of blood out, which was good, and got the people cheering. And it's nice that people get a scrap like that in the women's division. Someone said possible best women's fight ever at the time when I was watching this, and I was like, I don't know. I think Angela Hill versus Jessica Andrade is still my favourite, just for the clash of styles and all the drama. But yeah, I mean, good on those girls. I think Pudilova had lost the split decision, but I think she could be a much better fighter, especially if she starts working on that footwork, or at least remembering the footwork in the fight, because obviously it's one thing to work on it all camp and then forget it, but you got to get it down to basically muscle memory and instinct. Jim Miller versus Alex White, this was a surprising one. Jim Miller came out, cracked him with the left hand. Well, it was like a running combination. It was ugly stuff, but Jim Miller has been able to do that to some very good guys, like he knocked down Dwayne Ludwig back in the day. And got his back, choked him. It's pretty great. Quick sort of blitz by Jim Miller. Dude is a nasty motherfucker on the ground. Nasty as a sack of badgers, as Josh Barnett used to say about Hayato Sakurai. really strong grappler. And one of my favourite Jim Miller fights was against Charles Oliveira, and Oliveira was like the hot upcoming thing. Oliveira was a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but he was submitting everyone. And he fought Jim Miller, who's a black belt, but certainly not as flashy as Oliveira on the ground. And Jim Miller just tore his foot off. I can't remember if it was a footlock or a knee bar, but Oliveira was comfortably playing guard, and he just dived on this leg and submitted him. Yeah, I mean, good on Jim Miller. It's an interesting one because I think, didn't he have Lyme disease? Was it him who had Lyme disease and was recovering from it, or Weil's disease or something like that? Like nothing life-threatening, but like something that would take you out of action for a while. But also Jim Miller, like, he is looking more fragile, and I think he's always going to have trouble with the better technical strikers. You know, he had a lot of trouble with Donald Cerrone kicking him at range and things like that. But I think like he's always going to be game enough and dangerous enough that he's a fun fight for most people. Is that sort of durability that's kind of waning now? We'll be talking about Diego Sanchez in a minute, but you know, I think Jim Miller's still capable of fun stuff, like the fight with Poirier, for instance. You know, it's very easy to forget that while Jim Miller's way down in the division now, Poirier's right at the top, and they're only like a year removed from that barn-burning decision, which was a split decision, I believe, or maybe it was a majority decision. But yeah, Jim Miller's still very much a bad dude, and pretty cool to see him beat Alex White like that. Diego Sanchez versus Craig White. Bad night for the White brothers. Craig White, let's be honest, doesn't belong in the UFC. He came in at last minute to replace someone for Neil Magny. Neil Magny easily kneed him in the head. And that was like the only time you've ever seen Neil Magny knock someone out. But this fight against Diego Sanchez, he looked like he had no idea how to walk. I don't think he even attempted to walk at any point. The entire fight took place along the fence, with him pressed towards the fence. But he was trying to play off his back and like invert and things like that. Ended up getting teabagged several times. Any fighter from there in the UFC, like a good top fighter in the UFC, is going to be trying to at least get to the fence and use it to stand up. Even a guy like Brian Ortega, if you put him against the fence, he's going to stop playing guard and start trying to stand up, as he did against Tavares. So it was very strange. And it'd be one thing if like he was trying to stand up and Diego was wrestling him down or doing the Habib and actually punishing him while he tried to stand up. But he just wasn't trying. It was bizarre. Really heartwarming to see Diego get a win, but also awful because he now thinks he's going to fight for the title this year. And he's just going to get smoked as soon as he fights anyone of UFC level. Great to see people's worries about his brain damage almost immediately disappear, though. This sport is so fickle and so stupid regarding damage taken. Someone, I think it was, I can't remember who it was, some MMA journal who I follow, so he must be fairly good, tweeted like, Diego has absorbed 1,260 or something like that strikes to the head in his UFC career, and everyone was retweeting it saying, oh my god, that's awful, get him out of there. And then those same people, once he won the fight, were like, oh my god, I can't wait to see him in with like better welterweights. Now he's back on his game. Just awful. Darren Stewart versus Charles Byrd. I don't really remember that, even though it was a knockout. My boy Frank Camacho sadly fell victim to the head kick. I do like Frank Camacho a lot, but you know, shit happens. Aljamain Sterling versus Cody Stamann. That was a fun fight, I thought. I thought it played out quite similar to how I expected it. Sterling was kicking a fair bit, shooting on some real, like, lame duck shots from out in the open. Stamann was trying to back him up and use his hands. But Aljo finally got him down, and he did a beautiful transition to mount just as Cody was sort of bridging into him. Took the back. Stamann went to sort of, like, stand and shake him down, sort of quad pod style-y. Sterling reaches for the leg when he sees it and applies a Suluev stretch. And I think he like smashed his knee. He went into it sideways. You know, as a submission, the Suluev stretch is really more of a range of motion issue. You know, like there's so many ways it could hurt you. You know, it could be like tearing your hamstring, or you could get it so it is basically a knee bar. But he seemed to really hurt Stamann with it, which was sort of a bummer, but an amazing submission victory. Tapology I'm looking at now has it listed as a knee bar, but it's the Suluev stretch. It's I think there's only been one in the UFC. I can't remember who it's named after. Obviously some guy called Suluev. But basically it's a very specific submission for when guys trying to stand and shake you down their back like that. I skipped Suarez versus Carla Esparza. Esparza got stopped with 30 seconds to go. That's sad. Nico Price versus Abdel Razak Al Hassan. That was a weird one. it was one of those ones where the commentators were just starting to say, even though Price has the edge on the ground, he feels like he's competent enough to stand and try his luck against Al Hassan, and then he immediately gets smoked along the fence, in 40 seconds. But yeah, just swung and bung on him through them bungalows and caught him flat along the fence. Not a lot more to say about that. He threw a couple of nice wide rights to the body, and both of them, I think, knocked Price off balance. So big power on that Al Hassan lad, but he looks so small for the weight class. Sorry, just yawning because I read John Dodson versus Jimmie Rivera. Oh my god, John Dodson is such a fucking boring fighter now. Oh, circle, 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 step outside the lead foot and triple or quadruple the left straight, not really putting anything into it. And Jimmie Rivera was ready for it. He was doing a nice thing where he'd counter with the right uppercut to the solar plexus, drawing the left hand in because Dodson likes to check the left hand with his right, and then left hooking him as he ran past. And he landed that a couple of times, but most of the fight was just Dodson doing nothing, and Rivera walking forwards. Good to see Rivera back on track after that harsh loss to Marlon Moraes. He is in that sort of Cub Swanson, Jose Aldo situation where the really quick victory means that we don't actually know how those two styles match up. But anytime you say, like, Jimmie Rivera versus Marlon Moraes, people will be like, already smoked him once in 5 seconds or whatever. He's got no chance. I don't want to see it. I've always said, like, one of the best things you can do against the hardest opponent in your career, like, if you are against someone really good, just try and take their head off right away. Try and catch him cold. Not off, like, the glove touch, but Roy Jones used to do this. Try and catch him cold, because if you can knock him out early, firstly, they might expect you to respect them more than that, so you've got a good chance of catching them early. But if you could do it early, you also take a lot of pressure off yourself on rematches. If you go the distance and win a decision or something like that, when you could have maybe clocked him cold early, you're going to have to fight him again, and it's going to be a lot harder, because they'll know what you do now. Zabit versus Brandon Davis. Brandon Davis gave a very good account of himself, I thought. Zabit did not look like anything special on the feet in this fight. If you thought he did, you don't know what you're watching. He did, however, look great in the wrestling, which is kind of what he does. It was good because Brandon Davis was just sort of like jabbing and feinting, and Zabit's thing is move back, and as they step in, he'll do the jump back kick, or he'll overhand, or he'll spinning back fist, and at several points, or he'll hop into the cross buttock throw as guys follow him. But Brandon Davis wasn't really following him. He was just sort of like pressuring towards him and then, staying on top of his feet. So a lot of things like the spinning back fist just slapped on his forearm, didn't bother him at all. The cross buttock throw hit him while his hips were square and couldn't get him over. And he was landing good low kicks. Back to Zabit onto the fence at a couple of points. Zabit was able to fight off the fence because Brandon Davis didn't really have anything he could do there. He wasn't going to the body. He wasn't going to wrestle him. So didn't really gain much of an advantage from that, but it was the same habit being shown over and over again. And of course, there'll be people who are like, well, maybe Zabit chose to go to the fence to show that he could, and he won't do that against a high-level competition. You're like, well, no, he's done it in every fight, and he doesn't actually realise he's doing it a lot of the time. He'll be surprised when he hits the fence. And, in his sole loss, he was taken down along the fence and then armbarred. Most of his, not dominating moments have come as he's had his back pushed to the fence, and he relies on, the other guy getting underhooks and then him being able to turn them around, which is something you won't be able to do against very, very good wrestlers. But Zabit, obviously well-rounded guy, so he took him down, wore on him for a round, and then once they hit the feet again, Davis seemed knackered and he was backing off instead. And that's when Zabit hopped in with that cross buttock throw, slung him to the mat, and it picked up the wrist as Davis rolled the turtle, which was beautiful. Got the back, and then exactly the same finish, Suloev stretch, which was so bizarre. The same thing happened with the bulldog choke a while ago. There was one in the history of the UFC, which was Carlos Newton versus Pat Miletich, and then there were two on the same card, 10 years later. It was absolutely bizarre. But that's just the weird kind of sport we live in. So, nothing new from Zabit. We really need to move it forward now. Bet he gets to top 10 now in the rankings, even though he's beaten no one of note. Jessica Andrade versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. This one went pretty much as expected. You've got a good right-hand puncher with a lazy right hand. She throws it and then she draws it back slowly. Or she throws... I think having good knees in the clinch has actually compounded that problem of not closing the door on the right hand. Kowalkiewicz will throw the right hand and then lean into the clinch. And that stuff was getting really badly rocked by Andrade right off the first exchange. She threw the right hand hung around, and Andrade's left hook cracked her in the jaw, and then suddenly it was a flurry of windmill blows, because Andrade can hit from both sides, and she's swinging wild, and Kowalkiewicz only really has the one hand that does damage. And then, Kowalkiewicz was leaving both hands out there while punching, so she'd throw her right hand and then leave it out there while she was trying to punch with her left. And then she was looking down at the floor trying to hit the body and coming up and got cracked clean on the chin by her right hand. Nothing special as a counter, but, it just happened because she was flailing and not looking at where she was throwing the punches either. Pretty bad performance from Kowalkiewicz, pretty good performance from Andrade, but again, nothing new from Andrade that would lead me to believe that someone like, no, specifically, Joanna Jędrzejczyk couldn't just circle out and jab her. But I don't know if Rose can do that. I've never seen Rose do that effectively, so Andrade versus Namajunas is a great fight to make. Andrade apparently wanted to fight Valentina, but, can't have her in against anyone really dangerous. Way! Oh my god, some nerds got so upset when I said I'd love to see Andrade fight her. Just grow up, it's women's MMA, no one really cares. And then your main event was Tyron Woodley versus Darren Till, and this was great. I wrote an article on this, go read it. It really just shows, that Darren Till doesn't do anything, super fancy. He just does basics really, not basics really well in terms of, mechanically, but he uses basics very, very well. And to do that, you've got to have good anticipation for what your opponents for how they're going to react. You've got to be able to read their reactions quite well and build on them. And you've got to be able to use feints and real strikes almost interchangeably. Because if your feints look nothing like your real strikes and your real strikes look nothing like your feints, you're not really confusing anyone, so you're not particularly scary or dangerous. Darren Till, very, very good at feinting and very, very good at sneaking in the left hand and the 1-2 and things like that. Problem was, Tyron Woodley was on him from the opening bell. It was so strange. He was pushing the pace while coming off the fence. So he'd back onto the fence and then he'd come at him and then he'd go back to the fence and then come at him again. And he was threatening the clinch all the time, taking slower moments. The first round was very slow. People are now like, Tyron Woodley's not a boring fighter, but he was, if the whole fight had been that, which it could have been if he hadn't cracked him clean, it would have been a boring state of affairs. Tyron Woodley will often just pick up the clinch and push to the fence instead of trying to get the takedown. But Darren Till, he really put Darren Till in this state of mind between these fast right hands and clinches and picking up the leg and going to the clinch. He put Darren Till in this state of mind where he was still showing the feints and getting the reactions, but he wasn't stepping in on the real punches. So he threw he certainly landed 0 strikes in the fight. 1 insignificant strike, I think it is. Or 1 not significant, or whatever it is. But between the first round and the second round, Darren Till's corner are please throw some stuff now. He comes out and you can see him hyping himself up, and then he steps in with the punch, and Woodley times him perfectly because, it's not a technical mechanical thing. It's a thing that in the fight, if you can very clearly tell the difference between the feints and the real strikes, he feints loads and the real strikes aren't coming, and then suddenly he's puffed himself up and he's going to run at you. That all of that stuff that Darren Till does well wasn't there, and it was a state of mind thing. I'm not going to say mentally collapsed or anything like that. It's a very easy way to cheaply take away from the winner doing that. Nobody wants to read about Buster Douglas or what's her name, poor Osaka, who just beat Serena Williams. So let's focus on the person who lost and make it about the losing rather than the winning. But yeah, Woodley really had him second guessing himself a lot. Darren Till is a guy who has been oozing confidence from the moment that he stepped in the UFC, and you couldn't not see it there. Or rather, you could see it not being there. He was doing his usual moves, but he wasn't taking advantage as he does against other people. So fantastic performance by Tyron Woodley, and a short arm Das. You don't see those too often, but he is absolutely jacked. But yeah, the short arm Das, where you grip the forearm rather than the bicep. And he was properly rolling onto his side, and you could see it was almost cranking Till's head around in the sort of a Japanese necktie style, and Till went bright red and then tapped his ass to submit. Lots of people love the falling of a hype train, but everyone knows that Darren Till is legit. You can't take away from what he's done up to that, but his one fight against a really top guy wasn't super impressive in Stephen Thompson. The talent is real, but there's time to develop it. And Tyron Woodley always seems like a super cool guy after fights. When he's not accusing people of racism, he's a cool guy. One of the things that's always endeared me to him, even though I don't always enjoy his fights, is that Kelvin Gastelum fight when Gastelum came in massively overweight and he had to give 20% of his purse to Tyron Woodley, and then Tyron Woodley said afterwards, "No, I don't want his purse. I'll give it back to him. I've made that mistake before." The guy seems like a veteran, is how I describe it. He seems very you know, if he would, I think he'd make a good coach one day because he seems like he's seen a lot of what the sport has and understands it quite well. What is he? He's only like 30 something. He's not, you know, we're painting this as like the veteran and the young upstart, but I think there's only like 5 years difference between them. Oh no, 1982. Wow. Okay, so yeah, he's getting up there. But good on Woodley, and it's always fun watching Dana White just grimace as he puts the belt on Woodley. And it was also awesome to see Woodley's reaction to getting given a black belt by Dean Thomas, which was a more emphatic reaction than for getting the actual belt. You know, it's one thing to be the best fighter in the world, but if you get the black belt, that's pretty cool too. Actually, black belts, that whole rabbit hole is quite interesting because the thing about good coaches is that they tend to make it about your growth rather than a level, you know, not how good you are. It's about how you've grown, you know. Kayotera is a great example. If you get a chance, go and search Kayotera black belt story on YouTube, because he tells the story about how he was beating everyone in his weight class, and then his coach said, well, why don't you move up a weight class and challenge the best guy in the world in jiu-jitsu or whatever it was. He goes up a weight class and he loses and he's distraught, and his coach gives him the black belt on the podium. And he's like, I don't want it, I lost. And the coach is like, well, that's the point. It's not about, you know, whether you win or lose. It's about what jiu-jitsu's done for you. It's a really moving story. I'm getting choked up just thinking about it. Go watch it. It's fantastic. And Kayotera is a super spiky autist. So, you know, if you can feel sympathy for him, it's quite a moving story. Kayotera is actually an awesome guy. He has a diet where he has to eat gummy bears like every 10 minutes. he actually can't compete on like a regular you know, athletic diet. He has hypoglycemia or whatever it is, so he has to eat just rubbish all the time to feel normal. And there's these stories of him coming into training eating like bags of Haribo. And like, you know, if you walked onto the mats having just eaten Haribo, you'd probably vomit everywhere. Anyway, enough about Kayotera. We're focusing on Tyron Woodley. So UFC 228 in the books, really good. And now we start the unstoppable march towards UFC 229, Khabib versus Conor, fallout of the Dolly incident. Right, let's do some questions. Hey Jack, huge fan of your work. Your studies on ringcraft in MMA are second to none. I'd never really paid attention to cage positioning before your post-mortem on Rousey versus Holm, but ever since then I've found myself internally screaming when a fighter unthinkingly backs themselves onto the cage. My two questions for you are, do you think that leading upward elbows a la Tony Ferguson are an underused tool that we might see more of in the future, or do you think they only work when they do because they are so uncommon and unexpected? 2. What do you think of Zabit's striking in his fight against Brandon Davis? Understandably, everyone will be talking about the crazy submission, and I think people will overlook how lost Zabit looked against a guy with some pretty basic technical striking with similar height and reach. Obviously, he's still a promising prospect. I think it'll be something to look out for if he ever gets to the upper parts of the rankings and fights guys like Moicano or Holloway. Cheers, from Jake. Number 1, let's talk about that upward elbow. I fucking love that upward elbow. What I love about the upward elbow especially, and this isn't just exclusively for the upward elbow, this is for most straight elbows anyway, is that it can be an intercepting blow. And the intercept, you know, you're not going to have much luck going to someone with the upward elbow. It's very tricky to do because it's such a short weapon. But if someone is reliably moving at you, you can step in and collide with them and cause a ton of damage without a lot of movement, really, as long as you're projecting the point of that elbow. There are guys who can almost punch with the elbow like that. Muang Thai is the guy I always say. Muang, M-U-A-N-G, Thai, the word Thai for Thailand, all one word. He's, I can't remember what weight he is, but he's a very accomplished Muay Thai fighter. Was he a Lumpini champion of some kind, or one of the stadium champions? But if you watch his fights, he is always shooting for elbows, and he throws the elbow straight at the opponent. Like, he'll do it off all sorts of different kicks and catches and counters. So you can get some serious power on it if you want to use it as an offensive weapon. But in terms of the counter upward elbow, as Tony Ferguson uses it, yes, that is one of the most underused, criminally underused strikes in the game. And the reason that it works so well is that a lot of fighters, when they cover up, or a lot of fighters when their opponent is covering up and walking forward, they're quite concerned about hurting their hands on their elbows or forearms. So slotting that jab up the center can be tricky, and they're a little bit concerned about shooting hooks around and things like that. Obviously, everyone knows that when a guy has his hands up like that, you want to check it with both your hands and turn the elbow over behind their guard. But if you come up the center, that's the one that most people aren't expecting. And, worst comes to worst, you clash elbows and you're not really going to You know, I've never heard of someone breaking their elbow from an elbow-to-elbow collision. It's not like really high velocity stuff like punches against solid bone. The other nice thing is that, like, especially when guys are covering and they got their chin tucked down, punching dudes on the top of the head or the front of the face really, or, you know, like the top part of the front of the face when they've got their head really buried in their chest, really not good in terms of damage given to damage taken ratio. You're more likely to hurt your hands, and that's when those upward elbows really help. Because the great thing about elbows generally is if you can find the top of the head with an elbow, you've got a really good chance of cutting a dude open. Not like the front top of the head, you know, the part that's not covered in hair. Well, you could probably cut through the hair, but whereas that's the worst point, the punch is the best point to elbow, because you've got the very thin skin there and bone immediately behind it. And any time that you can cut someone above the eye, you've got the chance of it dripping down into their eye, which can force the stoppage, or if the referee's not that bothered, blood in the eyes just makes life really, really hard for the opponent. One of the things you don't see people doing very well, even if they do use the upward elbow, is go from that double hand checking position, so both hands on the opponent's fists or forearms, depending on where their hands are, and then going with the upward elbow, because you almost have to, like, turn your... well, like a kotegayashi sort of throw, you have to turn your own wrist back and bring your elbow inside of your hand, which is a tricky motion to do, whereas rolling the elbows over around the outside from that position is very easy. But I think the upward elbow with the lead hand as an intercepting weapon is pretty easy to learn, and I think a lot of fighters should be investing time in that, because the damage you can do for so little effort and so little time to learn and master is obscene. The one that you won't see that often is like a rear-armed upward elbow, and that's the kind that Muay Thai is absolutely brilliant at. So that's sort of like a specialty weapon, you know. Whenever you're talking about learning things, there are things that are going to take much longer to learn than other things. You know, everyone should be able to throw a jab and a right straight and a good low kick and things like that. But when you're talking like a Brazilian kick or a hook kick or a side kick or something like that, or a really good wide right to the body, or a cross counter or something like that, those things take more time to hone, and you're only going to be able to like work on so many of those in your career and actually keep them as effective weapons. So, you know, the straight right elbow or the upward right elbow or rear rather, you know, you might be a southpaw. That's a bit of a commitment in terms of time. But as I said, I've watched Muay Thai just flatline people with that. And Zabit's striking, I mean, we talked about it a bit already, but yeah, he did look quite confused. And that's the sort of thing, like, Machida had it too. And a lot of these guys, Uriah Hall also, a lot of these guys who are countering the step, which is the best, you know, in my humble opinion, the best thing you could, or the easiest thing you can do is counter steps rather than trying to ascertain what strike's coming. You get the person. There's a lot of talk about fighting being like a dance, but people think like Muhammad Ali dancing around the ring on his own. But think of it more like dancing with a partner. You know, you step back, they step forward. So you can get people stepping like that, and then if you know that they're going to step, you can counter the step by intercepting with a right straight or a jumping back kick or whatever. And that's what Zabit does very well. But when you see guys like him and Uriah Hall against opponents who aren't going to overstep and who are just sort of cautiously stepping up to the mark each time and keeping everything under control, they look very... well, not lost. Well, actually, yeah, lost. But they look very disappointed that their favourite stuff isn't going to work. I think I'd be fascinated to see him against Moicano. That's a great fight. Maybe a little bit too soon for him, because Moicano actually is, you know, top of the heap featherweight now. Whereas Zabit is still very much, look at all this guy's talent. If only we could get him in with someone good. Anyway, cheers, Jake. Hi Jack, US listener here. My question is about the effectiveness of the closed guard in MMA. It seems that the instinct of a lot of BJJ players when they find themselves on their back is to secure full guard and to try and work from there, looking for a submission or a sweep. However, recently, it seems that wrestlers that gain top position usually make little attempts to pass the guard and are content to work within the guard to posture up and land strikes. Alistair Overeem was finished by Curtis Blades from this position, and Chad Mendes was able to land quite a lot of strikes on Conor McGregor in their bout from this position before he gassed and was knocked out. Is this instinct to secure full guard still an effective tool in MMA, or is it becoming a detriment to try and secure a defensive jiu-jitsu position against fighters who aren't trying to submit their opponents? Love the podcast. I repeat your analysis to my casual friends, and they are convinced I'm a genius. Cheers. Doesn't have a name. Yeah, the closed guard is always up for debate in MMA because there are still guys who use it very well, like Ortega. Cerrone has a fairly decent closed guard. Crone Gracie, obviously. I think there was a guy actually taught in the UK for a while called, I think it was Legato, and he won it might have been the Worlds. He won one of the major tournaments in jiu-jitsu at heavyweight after having battled cancer for quite a while. And I got to train with him a few times, and he had a very interesting philosophy. Like, people were like, oh, the legato guard. And he was like, the legato guard is just using whatever guard is appropriate at the time. And I think that's what's sort of missing in a lot of ground play in MMA. You know, there are times when you're going to desperately want to back up to the fence and try and stand up along it. There are times when you're going to want to try and stay out in the open and use your submissions and attacks. There are times when you're going to be wanting to use your closed guard, but the opponent's just sitting back tight, keeping everything safe, and then trying to posture up and elbow you in the head. And I think those times are the ones where people benefit from opening the guard, and mainly sliding in the knee shield is a useful one in MMA. You know, it's a bit more dangerous in MMA than it is in jiu-jitsu, where like if you're in closed guard and you want to open your guard, you just take grips on the sleeves, and then you can slide in the knee shield like scissor style and open it up and start applying a spider guard or something like that. But if you watch Damian Maia, actually there's a great study by, there's one by BJJ Scout and there's another one by Gambledub of Damian Maia's bottom work. And when he's in the full guard, he'll open his guard, slide the knee shield in on the like high on the chest, and he'll like let the opponent sort of swing at him, and then as they do, he'll use the knee shield leg to kick under the armpit, lift them up, and he'll thread the other foot through between their legs, come up on a half guard single. And I think that's a really powerful method in MMA. Like, if you watched Volkanovski versus, I can't remember the name of the poor lad, but he was getting beaten up along the fence, getting taken down into closed guard, couldn't do anything. And he finally opened his guard. Volkanovski passed, but then the guy got out the back door with the single. I think sometimes it's, if someone wants to sit in your guard and not pass, it's sometimes a good idea to put them in a position where it's easier to pass than it is to try and stay there. You know, if you knee shield a guy from like closed guard, if you scissor your knee in rather, and put the other one on their hip or whatever, they're in a position where it's very hard to keep hitting you from that position. But if they run past, they'll be able to hit you much better. And that's the sort of time when you can try and come up on the single and things like that. I think it's the same, you know, the general thing is the closed guard as a position is useless if you want to keep it as a position. I think Saulo Ribeiro talked about this also. Like, he'll encourage a guy to go to half guard if he feels like they're giving him some weight that he can get underneath, and he'll keep him back in full guard if he feels like they're sitting back and he can try and sit up into them and stuff like that. I think the other thing that's really missing from a lot of closed guard work is that third branch, you know, sweep, submit, stand up. And BJ Penn, you know, set those down on paper years ago. But if you watch his fight with Matt Serra, there's a couple of others. Like, if dudes sit up in his guard, he goes up with them. And if they don't push him right back down and give him like their weight so that he can pull them down with him and start working on stuff, he'll just stand up. Like, if you watch his fight with Matt Hughes, the second one, he sits up into him as soon as Matt Hughes postures up, and he keeps his arm framed across Matt Hughes, and basically bisects Matt Hughes' body with his shoulder. So kind of like a shoulder roll, but on the ground, basically. And he basically cuts himself off so that only one of Matt Hughes' hands can reach him, and then eventually he ducks under it and starts moving to the back. Apparently he did blow out his ribs doing that, but it's a cool little transition nonetheless. But then, you know, the knee shield isn't an answer to everything. I'm just suggesting it as like one means to move between one guard and another. Tyron Woodley is a great example. Like, Stephen Thompson, when he got taken down in the very first round, put in the knee shield thinking like, that'll keep his weight off me. And Tyron Woodley just dropped his weight on the knee shield and pounded the shit out of him for a round. Tyron Woodley, very good from top control generally, but also top half guard. He just finished Darren Till from top half guard. But Darren Till, when he got him to closed guard, put the knee in for the knee shield, and Woodley just put his weight on it and kept hitting until he could pass to half guard. I think that, you know, Ryan Hall said it best: don't believe the Gracie marketing machine. Top position is awesome and will always be better than bottom position. But I think also people have a lot easier time flowing from top position to top position and making the adjustments in their mind than they do flying from bottom position to bottom position. I feel like, guys get in this... I think the hierarchy feels a lot stricter when you're on bottom in MMA than it does on top. Obviously, getting mounted or letting the guy pass the side control is fairly bad, but I think there's this tendency to treat closed guard like it's the best, rather than just another tool, Whereas if you're on top, you're fine being in closed guard, you're fine being in half guard. If you get past even further, that's great. And of course, we always talk about the use of elbows. They are really the only effective strike that's legal. From the bottom, except the Nico Price hammer fist, but they're the only really effective strike from the bottom of guard, and the added bonus is that you can use them with the legs locked too, in full closed guard. And I think until fighters start using their opponent's weight to draw them onto elbows more effectively, like Tony Ferguson, Brian Ortega, Michael Bisping against GSP, I think until everyone starts doing that, the closed guard is still very much at a massive disadvantage. But, compare Tony Ferguson's performance from guard against Kevin Lee to Edson Barboza or something like that. I'm sure in rolling, they're both very, very good off their backs. But the addition of effective elbows by Tony Ferguson made Kevin Lee's job a lot harder. And, it's not just elbows on top of a submission game. You have to do other stuff to make the elbows land better. If you watched how often he was posting his feet on Kevin Lee's hips and so on. It really is a whole different game, We talk about jiu-jitsu in MMA, but it's really MMA grappling. Anyway, cheers, dude. Right, I was going to do some previews, but we're actually almost an hour deep, so I think we'll do the previews for Oilernick versus... Oh, Oilernick versus Hunt. Yeah, we'll do the previews for Oilernick versus Hunt later in the week. It's the first Russian event. It's not what people wanted from the first Russian event, but there's some good names. I mean, Nikki Thrills or whatever. Nikita Krylov's back against Jan Blachowicz, so he's got a chance to jump right into contention right there. You got Mairbek Taizamov on the card. You got Jan Johnson, who is pretty fun, versus Rustam Kabalav, who's local. You got Petr Yan. Really decent looking card. Anyway, if you want to support the podcast / get in on the Patreon history episodes, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to podcast, fightsgoneby@gmail.com. If you want to follow what I'm doing at any time, fightprimer.com. And buy Notorious, because I think we've got the new edition out now. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Tyron bless.